that the board submit and put into effect a comprehensive plan to eliminate the dual system in Fort Worth. And it's our contention that they have not done that. That we're in basically the same position we were in last year when we had the original hearing and went up.
We're not seeking a solution in this study to the Trinity River as a project or the Town Lake development as a project. However, we feel that there's been enough interest shown in the past through previous studies. The business community is vitally interested in this area, that there will be something happening here in the future.
Having a new city hall built is adversely affecting Dallas's image. Do you feel that way too?
That may very well be so, but the citizens of Dallas who pay the taxes will not approve the IMP design. I think we should get it over with once and for all by settling the argument, by submitting it to the voters, and this way they can reject the IMP design by rejecting the additional $8 million. And by this way, Phil, then we can go on to designing a building that can be built within reason and within the available funds.
What about Mr. Gregory's argument that we're losing money by renting office space for the city?
Well, this can be easily answered by saying that we can spend up to 3 times more in rent before we offset the interest cost that will be required to build a new city hall at the proposed cost of the IMP design.
Mr. Mayo, we are the only organization in the country where, in fact, you can rent a plane, fly it, and leave it in another area, much like a rent-a-car. At the first part of this fall, you will be able to fly from here to Houston and perhaps other Texas cities and leave your plane with a small drop-off fee. Within the next year or so, we hope that this will be throughout the entire United States. It's, you might say, the first rent a plane as much as a Hertz is to automobiles. We are to aviation.
Now, you came up with this idea just a few years ago. What made you come up with it?
Well, I certainly didn't come up with the idea. As a former customer of Lease-A-Plane, and as a pilot myself, a businessman pilot, there's been a great need for this to go to different locations and be able to get new, updated equipment, well-equipped airplanes that you can take and fly on business trips. For example, our first customer here in Dallas was a man from Portland who had business within a 200-mile radius of Dallas. He flew in commercially, rented a plane, conducted his business, was on his way home that night. We're never able to do this before. Renting a car and covering that same territory would be at least a 3-day trip and considerably more expensive.
I take it from the fact that you're going to Washington to look into this that organized crime is a serious concern in your world. To what degree are we faced with the problem in Dallas, and does organized crime necessarily mean mafia?
No, not at all. You have definitions of organized crime. Everybody you talk to has got a different one of organized crime. What is organized crime? It's really just kind of an intangible thing that you can't say, this is organized crime and this is not. Organized crime, really, you can put it down to a third-party profit in some form of crime. If there's a third party involved in it that's receiving profit from it, then more or less it's organized.
Then in that sense of the word, at least, Dallas does have an organized crime problem.
It does, yes.
Well, Jim, it's always real difficult to come up with too much of a game plan when you only get to work out for 3 days or something of this nature. But, of course, these boys, they all have a great deal of talent, and we're just going to sort of turn them loose and let them play.
What's the outcome going to be Wednesday night?
Oh, well, I don't know, but we sure came up here to win. And, of course, I know that the North has, I think, exceptional group of boys this year. I think year in, year out, and I think records are bared out that the South part of the state has a better basketball players, but this year they seem to have an outstanding group and a rather large group. And I think they had what was considered to be 5 blue chippers, and several of them are going to SMU and numerous other large schools, and they have a real good group. But of course, we're playing to win the ball game.
Current political squabble again.
Based on the present planned ask for expenditures for the level of service that seems to be required for Fort Worth, we will have to have additional sources of revenue for the coming year.
Has the payroll deduction tax worked in other cities of Fort Worth size?
Yes, there are approximately 100 cities in the United States.
2 points are likely to cause concern. First, the people who live outside the city but work inside are liable to rise up in arms over what some of them have called taxation without representation. They'll have to pay the tax without the benefit of voting in the charter amendment election. Second, there's a provision that allows for a tax credit of 50% for ad valorem taxes paid. Now that means if you're a property owner, you can deduct from your ad valorem taxes at least 50% of what you paid in payroll taxes. So apartment dwellers and others who don't own property in the city would not have any relief from the payroll tax, while homeowners would have a built-in deduction. In the City Council meeting this morning, Councilman Ted C. Peters, who's a home builder, recommended that the 50% deduction should be raised to 100% to give homeowners more relief. That's briefly how the tax would work. It'll have to be approved by the voters in a charter amendment election. There are going to be 2 more public hearings on the proposed amendments, to which the tax question will be added. One thing's for certain: those hearings are going to get interesting and probably stormy. This is Jay Lewis, Channel 8 News on the Move, Fort Worth.
The 4-day school week is not new in education. There are some schools that have 4-day educational week for students now. This is consistent with our efforts to move toward greater flexibility in scheduling, and I think that although it'll be difficult, it'll be complex, I think it has some real possibilities, and we welcome the opportunity to work toward this end.
The basic part of the problem presents itself here in this one picture. Within a stone's throw of modern in-town apartments, there are barns and sheep and people who make their living off the land. The City of Plano and the Plano Independent School District are seeking a more equitable tax evaluation between land in the city and land out here in the country. The problem seems to be that most of the land in the area is in the country, although it is, some of it, being assimilated into the business district. If the land is to be sold for business development, it's quite possibly worth $2,500 or more per acre. But while it's still farmland, the value is considerably less. The people whose land is still used for farming say there is no way they can gain enough benefit from the land to make it worth paying the higher tax rates of a business investment possibility property. Judge Thomas Crofts enjoined the Plano Tax Equalization Board from meeting to accept the land revaluation. His action came in answer to a plea from the Plano Community Taxpayers Association. Now let's take an acre of maize. Let's take an acre of maize, for example. What can you figure to make off of that?
Well, If we make average 2,500 pounds to the acre, Jerry, and we get $2 a hundred, that's $50.
And then after you've paid your operating expenses, what kind of profit would you get off of that before we consider taxes?
Well, you would probably, the time you take your operating expense off, you may make $20.
And they're proposing to tax you up to $42 for that acre.
Right.
So the land would not make as much money as the taxes.
You're completely correct.
The proposition has been offered that the city of Plano needs money, that they have problems and things they want to do with this increased revenue. Is that in fact a consideration in this?
I do not consider it to be so, no.
What happens now if in fact you do not get the evaluation as newly stated? What happens if you have to go back to the old rolls?
Well, we can operate on the old roads, but basically the thing that will happen is that the taxes will not be equal. The people in the city are going to be paying more than their fair share of tax than persons without the city, persons holding property which on the fair market value is valued at a greater amount of money than what is being valued for on tax purposes.
The Plano School Board has hired John Plath Green, Dallas attorney and the president of the Dallas School Board, to assist them in the matter. Green says he will file an appeal in the 5th District Court of Civil Appeals in an effort to get around the injunction set by Judge Thomas Cross. Jerry Taff, Channel 8 News on the Move, Plano.
City Attorney S.G. Jandro has written a legal opinion that says, in essence, that the City Council cannot pass an income tax ordinance without the approval of the voters. That opinion stems from the fact that City Manager Roger Line is looking for new sources of revenue to balance an overburdened budget. With the demand for new city services, the present taxing structure is proving inadequate. The first step in the process of getting a new tax is finding out whether or not it would be legal. Attorney Jandro says it would be. The next step is determining exactly what the taxing procedure would be. That isn't ironed out yet, but Jandro's proposal is for a payroll withholding tax similar to the federal income tax. It would be levied on all residents of the city, whether they work in Fort Worth or outside the city, and on all persons working in the city who may live somewhere else. So if you live in Fort Worth or work in Fort Worth, you'd have to pay the tax. Jandro proposes a maximum of 1% tax. Nobody really knows how much money this would bring into the city coffers, but staff members are working on that now. In an effort to find out how badly the tax is needed, I talked with Fort Worth Finance Director Morris Matson.
This is Custer Street in South Oak Cliff. Reports had indicated that this quiet section slept uncaring early Sunday while an 18-year-old soldier from near Houston ran down the street with a gunshot wound in his back, calling for help. But homicide detectives tell Channel 8 News that's not true. Detective Joe Poe says the soldier, Private James F. Underwood, was here before 5 o'clock Sunday morning when his body was reported by a resident. But Poe, reconstructing the tragedy, says tales of people ignoring knocks on doors and cries for help are exaggerated. Poe says Underwood only knocked on one door and that he left before sleepy residents could get to the door to see who was there. And Poe says far from being reluctant to help, witnesses are what he calls very cooperative. From their accounts and other information, police say Underwood arrived in Dallas between midnight and 1 a.m. Sunday, en route to visit his mother in Conroe, Texas, a Houston suburb. In his pockets were leave papers from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, more than $200 in cash, and his ticket to Houston. He died from a .38 caliber gunshot wound in the back. Police say they don't know yet how the soldier got into the neighborhood, but they tell of witnesses reporting a dark-colored, foreign-made sedan following the soldier down the street as he sought help. Police theorize that the murder was the result of an attempted armed robbery. Phil Reynolds, Channel 8 News on the Move, on Custer Street.